I was 62 when I realized I'd been financing my own humiliation. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of day you forget before it's even over. I'd just finished a double shift at the hospital, my hands smelling faintly of latex and antiseptic, the kind of smell that never quite leaves your skin after 40 years of nursing. I stopped by the bank because I'd noticed an odd withdrawal alert, small enough not to raise alarms, but off just enough to itch at the back of my mind. The teller printed the statement and slid it across the counter with that professional politeness I used to have when delivering bad news to families. My eyes caught on one number, $5,000, withdrawn from our joint savings. The signature was mine. Only, it wasn't. I stood there for a long moment, the hum of the air conditioner loud in my ears. My name, my handwriting, had been traced. I'd seen forgeries before on patients' insurance forms. My husband's hand wasn't neat, but it was practiced. He must have thought I wouldn't notice, that after all these years of working nights, I'd grown too tired to look too closely. The woman behind the counter asked if I wanted to dispute the transaction. I told her no. My voice sounded foreign to me, flat, careful. I folded the paper, slipped it into my purse, and smiled like a woman who'd just remembered something trivial. The smile stayed on my face all the way to the car, where it cracked apart the moment I shut the door. I drove home slow, window cracked open even though the air was cold. The road between the hospital and our house is long, lined with fields that go brown in the fall. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world looked exactly the same, even when everything underneath it had shifted. When I walked into the house, the lights were on in his study. I could hear the soft click of his keyboard. He always said paperwork helped him unwind. I stood in the doorway for a while, just looking at him. Same man I'd loved since I was 21. His hair thinner, his shoulders a little slouched, but still carrying that quiet arrogance that once felt like confidence to me. He looked up briefly, smiled, and said, "Hey, you're home early?" I almost asked right then. The words crowded at the back of my throat, pressing like a storm. But something stopped me. Maybe pride, maybe exhaustion, or maybe a part of me already knew this wasn't just about one forged signature. I cooked dinner instead. Baked chicken, rice, and the last of the green beans from the garden. He talked about the business, how things were finally picking up again. I nodded, kept my eyes on the plate, thinking of the years that money represented. My parents' house I'd sold after their funeral, the savings I'd built for our retirement, every shift I'd picked up when he said he just needed a little more time to get the company stable. After dinner, he kissed my forehead and thanked me for always keeping us afloat. It was almost funny. Almost. That night, I lay in bed beside him, listening to his slow, even breathing. I thought about the way my mother used to warn me, don't ever let a man control your kindness. He'll start calling it duty. I'd laughed at her then, too young to understand the weight of that sentence. I stared at the ceiling until dawn painted thin lines of light across it. Every sound felt amplified, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the floorboards. That's when the anger started. Not wild, not screaming, but quiet and deliberate, like water freezing over. The next morning, I went back to the bank. This time I asked for copies of all recent transactions. The teller, a younger woman with gentle eyes, hesitated before sliding over the stack. "Are you sure you want to see all of them?" she asked softly. I nodded. The first few pages were routine: bills, groceries, gas. Then came the pattern: luxury boutique stores I'd never been to, weekend hotel stays in the city, a jewelry purchase worth more than our car. My husband hadn't just taken my money. He'd used it to build another life, one where I didn't exist except as a source of funding. I walked out of the bank and sat in the car again, staring at the paper pile on the passenger seat. The numbers blurred as tears burned the back of my eyes. I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying to hold in the sound that wanted to escape, half sob, half laugh, because really, How do you mourn something that's still breathing beside you? I didn't go home right away. I drove to the park where my parents used to take me as a child. The same park where my husband had proposed, back when we both thought the world was small and manageable. I sat on a bench overlooking the pond, thinking about the woman I'd been all these years. Obedient, practical, endlessly forgiving. I'd spent decades fixing everyone else's wounds, never noticed the slow bleed inside my own house. When the sun started to set, I stood up, folded the papers neatly, and put them back in my purse. My hands had stopped shaking. The anger had settled into something colder, sharper. That night, when he kissed me goodnight, I kissed him back. I smiled. I asked how his day had been. I even laughed at his little stories. And when he fell asleep, I got up, went to the kitchen, and laid out the bank statements under the soft yellow light, line after line of betrayal. It wasn't the money that broke me. It was the handwriting. Mine, but not mine. The proof that he knew me well enough to copy me, and little enough to think I'd never see it. That's when I knew. The life we'd built together wasn't a home anymore. It was a stage set, and I'd been acting my part too well. I didn't cry again after that. I just began to watch. There's a heaviness that comes after discovery. Not shock, not grief, just the slow settling of truth. The morning after I found the statements, I went to work as usual. I checked blood pressure, changed bandages, and listened to patients complain about the food. My hands did what they always did, but my mind stayed somewhere else, tracing the past like a map, looking for where the rot began. I'd met Richard when I was 21, still in my nursing whites, still naive enough to believe love made people better. He was charming then, talked like a man who'd read too many books about success, who believed he'd be different. He said I grounded him. I mistook that for partnership. We married in the old courthouse. No fancy dress, no photographer. I didn't care about that. What mattered was the way he looked at me, like I was the calm in his chaos. It took me years to realize he liked chaos. He just preferred someone else to clean it up. I worked nights at the hospital so he could focus on his business ideas. That was always the promise. Once this takes off, you can rest. He said it when we were 30, then 40, then 50. By the time we reached 60, I knew rest was a language I'd never be fluent in. My parents left me a small inheritance after they passed. Nothing extravagant, just enough to pay off our house and give his company a push. I used to feel proud of that, proud that I could help us get ahead. He called it our safety net. Now I understand he meant his freedom fund. I remember the early days of his business, me making sandwiches at midnight, typing invoices on our old computer while he slept on the couch, exhausted from networking. I believed in him like I believed in gravity. I thought hard work and loyalty could hold a man steady. But loyalty is a strange thing. When it's one-sided, it turns into blindness. Looking back, the signs were all there. The business dinners that didn't require receipts. The sudden interest in gym memberships. The cologne that didn't smell like him, but lingered on his shirts. I ignored all of it because the alternative, that the life I'd built was a lie, was too heavy to carry. You tell yourself it's normal, that all marriages lose their spark, that exhaustion is love's quiet form. And one day, you wake up realizing the silence between you isn't peace, it's absence. My daughter once asked me, when she was 15, if I was happy. I told her happiness wasn't something you chased, it was something you maintained. That was my mother talking through me. A woman who never left my father, even when he spent more nights at the bar than at home. She used to say, "Men get restless, wives get patient." I became my mother without noticing. At work, the younger nurses would talk about leaving boyfriends who cheated or men who didn't help around the house. I used to envy them, their certainty, their refusal to tolerate disrespect. But I was raised in a different time. Back then, we called endurance character. I started thinking about all the years I'd spent making his life easier, packing lunches, ironing shirts, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. I used to think that was love, smoothing over his moods, defending him to friends when he was careless or cruel. He's under pressure, I'd say. He doesn't mean it. Maybe that's the cruelest part of devotion. It teaches you to excuse what you should escape. That week, I moved through the house like a guest. Everything looked the same, but the meaning had drained out of it. The wedding photo on the mantel, the anniversary cards I'd kept, the vacation mugs we bought years ago, all of it felt like props from a play that had already closed. At night, I'd catch him texting, smiling faintly at his phone. He'd turn the screen away, casual but deliberate. I'd go to bed pretending not to see. But inside, something steady was building. Not rage, not even sadness. Just a slow, clear recognition. This man doesn't deserve my heartbreak. I started writing things down. Dates, amounts, names of stores, old habits from the hospital. Record everything, even what seemed small. I kept the papers hidden in a box under the laundry detergent. He never touched the laundry. I thought about confronting him again, but there was no point. I'd seen the smirk once. I didn't need to see it again. He'd only twist the truth until I started doubting my own memory. That's what men like him do. They rewrite history in real time. One evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun drop behind the trees. The air smelled like rain and cut grass. I remembered my father telling me, after my mother's funeral, "You gave too much of yourself away, and there's no refund for that." I'd rolled my eyes then, but I finally understood. I wasn't just angry at Richard. I was angry at myself for being so careful, so dutiful, so goddamn polite while my own life shrank around me. That's when I made a quiet promise. I would never beg for his truth. If he wanted to play games, I'd play better. If he wanted to lie, I'd learn to listen differently. By the end of that week, the sadness had burned out. In its place, something clean remained. Cold, sharp, unflinching. People think heartbreak comes like thunder, but it doesn't. It's quieter than that. It's the sound of your own footsteps leaving the room, and realizing he doesn't even notice. It took me another month before I said anything. I waited, not out of fear, but precision. I needed to be sure, to see how far the rot had spread. Every night, he sat in that leather chair in his study, clicking through his emails, pretending to be busy. I'd walk past, carrying a cup of tea, pretending not to see the second phone he thought he hid so well. I knew the rhythm of his lies now. He'd always been smooth, never the shouting type, never cruel in the obvious way. His cruelty was quieter, wrapped in charm. When I finally confronted him, it wasn't with tears. I was too tired for that. It was a Sunday morning. I'd made pancakes the way he liked, even added blueberries. He sat reading the paper, humming. The calm before the cut. "I went through our bank statements," I said, sliding a folded paper across the table. He didn't even flinch at first, just blinked, then smiled. "You're worrying again. You've got to stop doing that." I didn't move. "You forged my signature, Richard." The paper stayed between us like a weapon neither of us wanted to touch. His eyes flickered, just once, then softened. That fake tenderness he used when he wanted to make me doubt myself. "Come on, sweetheart," he said, leaning back. "You're imagining things. You work too much. Probably saw an old withdrawal and mixed it up." His tone was patient, practiced, like I was a child confusing dates on a calendar. It made my skin crawl. I'd spent decades learning to de-escalate angry patients, to calm dementia outbursts, to keep my voice level in chaos. That training saved me right then. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just looked at him. "You bought jewelry. You stayed at hotels in the city. You used my parents' money for it." He laughed. Actually laughed. A soft chuckle that sliced straight through me. "You really think I'd waste money on another woman? Jesus, you're losing it, Mary. You've been watching too many TV dramas." The way he said my name, so condescending it almost sounded affectionate. That laugh stayed ringing in my ears for days. He reached across the table, touched my hand like a man comforting someone unstable. "Listen," he said quietly. "If you don't trust me, that's on you. But don't embarrass yourself with wild accusations. People talk." That line, "people talk," that was his warning shot. Not a threat, not exactly, just a reminder of who'd always controlled the story. I remember staring at our hands, his on top of mine, and realizing how much smaller my world had become. Every choice I'd made in the name of love had folded me into something manageable. I pulled my hand back. He noticed, and for a second, the smile cracked. Something mean flickered underneath. "You've changed," he said, almost accusingly. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe I just woke up." He stood up, brushed past me, and said over his shoulder, "Let's not make this dramatic. You're too old for that." Too old. 2 words, small enough to swallow, but bitter enough to stay lodged in the throat. He left the kitchen, whistling. I sat there, staring at the empty plate, the half-eaten pancakes. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but fury so pure it felt clean. I realized then, he wasn't defending himself. He didn't care if I knew. He enjoyed watching me stumble through disbelief. Gaslighting wasn't just his defense. It was his entertainment. That afternoon, I cleaned the house from top to bottom. Not for him, for me. I needed movement. Something to keep my body from exploding under the weight of everything unsaid. Every sweep of the broom felt like a small exorcism. That night, I cooked dinner again, same as always. He came home late, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. When he kissed my cheek, I didn't flinch. I'd already decided what kind of war I'd be fighting. Quiet, invisible, lethal. He thought I'd crumble. He thought he'd broken me. But the truth was simpler. I was done trying to fix a man who mistook mercy for stupidity. I went to bed early and stared at the ceiling, my heartbeat calm, steady. I could still hear his laugh in my head, the one that told me everything I needed to know about the man I'd built my life around. And somewhere between that sound and the darkness, I made a promise to myself he'd never laugh at me again. Not when I was finished with him. It came in a plain white envelope, addressed to Richard, but dropped into our mailbox by mistake. A hotel chain I recognized from the city. One he'd once claimed was too expensive for business stays. The kind of place that didn't rent rooms by the night, but by the indulgence. I wasn't even looking for proof anymore. But proof, it seems, has a cruel sense of timing. The bill was thick, several pages long, with itemized charges: champagne, dinner for 2, late checkout, spa services. The dates lined up neatly with the weekends he'd claimed to be at supplier meetings. I sat down at the kitchen table with the bill spread before me. I'd spent my life reading patient charts, decoding symptoms from scribbles and inconsistencies. This was no different, except the patient was my marriage, and the diagnosis was terminal. The name on the guest record stopped me cold. Room 413, Richard Thompson and guest, Emily Lane. Emily. For a moment, my mind refused to make the connection. Then it did. Like a flashbulb going off in a dark room. Emily had worked for us for nearly 3 years. Fresh out of college, bright, eager, full of praise for Mr. Thompson's mentorship. I used to bring her coffee during long meetings, ask about her parents, remind her not to burn herself out. She'd tell me, all smiles, that I was like a mother figure to her. It was such an ordinary kindness, the kind you give without thought, until it turned out to be the door you'd opened for your own undoing. I felt something strange in that moment. Not anger, not yet. Just a hollow disbelief, like I'd been written out of my own story while it was still unfolding. I called the hotel, pretending to confirm a reservation. The clerk confirmed the dates and even offered to rebook Mr. Thompson's preferred suite. My voice didn't shake when I thanked her. When I hung up, I didn't cry. I'd done enough of that years ago. Quietly, when the distance between us first grew. What I felt instead was the faint hum of understanding, the kind that sharpens, not softens, the heart. That night, he came home cheerful, talking about some business opportunity. He kissed the top of my head, opened a bottle of wine, and asked what was for dinner. I watched him pour his drink. The same hands that had signed away my inheritance, the same mouth that called another woman darling in a hotel bed I'd paid for. When he lifted his glass to toast, I said, "Emily called today." He froze for just a breath, the kind of pause only a liar makes before finding his script. Then he smiled. "Oh? What did she say?" "She wanted to thank me," I said. "Said she wouldn't have gotten where she is without you." He chuckled. "Well, that's nice. She's a good worker. Deserves to do well." That was it. No guilt, no flicker of shame, just that same measured ease, the tone of a man who's convinced himself he's untouchable. I nodded slowly, and in that tiny moment, something inside me clicked, like a lock opening. I saw it all at once. The manipulation, the forgery, the affair, the audacity to sit across from me still pretending. He'd built his kingdom on my labor and thought I'd thank him for the view. Later that night, I went into his study. He'd left the desk drawer unlocked. Arrogance again. Inside were files, receipts, even emails printed out. One caught my eye, a transfer of company ownership. His company, our company, signed over to E. Lane 6 months ago. He'd done it quietly, while I was working nights, too tired to read the mail. On paper, I was nothing. No stake, no signature, no say. But he'd made a mistake. One small, vital detail. The deed for the business property was still under my name, and my maiden one at that, from before marriage. Something he'd never bothered to change because, as he once said, "What's mine is yours." I stared at that document for a long time. Then I put everything back exactly where I found it. I didn't need to take it. Not yet. When I went to bed, he was snoring softly beside me. I watched the rise and fall of his chest, wondering how many nights he'd slept this peacefully, thinking I'd never look closely enough to find the truth. He'd underestimated the one thing he should have feared most, the patience of a woman who's finally stopped forgiving. Lying there in the dark, I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt awake. He thought betrayal made me weaker, but betrayal has a way of clarifying things, like how long you've been surviving instead of living. By morning, my plan had already started forming. I wouldn't confront him again. I wouldn't cry or scream or beg. Those were gifts he didn't deserve. No, I'd take something far more valuable than revenge. I'd take back my power. One paper, one signature, one silent move at a time. There's a calm that follows devastation, the kind that comes when you finally stop expecting anything to be fixed. That's where I lived for the next few weeks. I went to work, came home, smiled when he spoke. He still believed I was the same woman, tired, predictable, too loyal to notice the ground shifting beneath her. And maybe that was my advantage. He thought invisibility was my weakness. He didn't realize it would become my weapon. I began small. Every plan worth keeping starts in silence. I requested copies of our property deeds and business filings for tax purposes. I visited the lawyer who'd handled my parents' estate, an older man who still remembered my mother's handwriting. He looked surprised to see me, even more so when I asked about asset transfers and dormant trusts. "Thinking of updating your will?" he asked kindly. "Something like that," I said. "I just want to make sure what's mine can't be mishandled." He nodded, took off his glasses and lowered his voice. "Then you'll want to move quietly. That's how men like him miss their own downfall. They never imagine the quiet ones have teeth." I smiled at that. It had been a long time since anyone spoke to me like I still had them. Over the next month, I began to rebuild myself in the margins. I reopened an old account under my maiden name, using the address of a friend from nursing school. I shifted small amounts. Never enough to flag suspicion, just enough to start creating my escape hatch. At home, I learned his rhythms. When he checked the mail, which nights he stayed late, how long his showers lasted. I didn't need to follow him anymore. I knew exactly who he was. predictable, self-assured, careless in the way men become when they think their wives are too old to start over. Some nights, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, pretending to read, while he drafted business emails. I could see the reflection of his laptop screen in the window, messages to Emily, all wrapped in the language of mentorship and logistics. I didn't read every word. I didn't need to. I'd already read the ending. Then came the day I found out he was planning to sell the property, the same building still legally tied to my name. He'd already arranged buyers, probably promised Emily a share of the profits. The papers were set to be signed in 3 weeks. That gave me time, just enough. I called a notary, booked a private meeting, and reclaimed ownership in full, using the old clause from the original deed. He'd overlooked it because he never thought I'd bother to understand the paperwork. My daughter called that night. We hadn't spoken in months. She'd always said I made excuses for him. She was right. When I told her I was making some changes, she didn't press for details, but there was a pause. Then she said, "Good. You sound different, Mum. Lighter. Lighter." I hadn't felt that in years. I started purging the house, quietly, a drawer at a time. My old nursing certificates, photos I wanted to keep, my mother's jewelry, the things that meant me. Everything else could rot in that house. I booked a storage unit 2 towns over, paid in cash, and began moving boxes when he was gone. It was like being both ghost and architect, vanishing while building something new. He still kissed me goodbye each morning, still called me his rock. I'd smile, hand him his coffee, and think, "You have no idea how solid I can be." The lawyer called a week before the sale. "Everything's transferred," he said. "Legally, you hold the full rights. He can't touch it without your consent." I thanked him, hung up, and sat in silence. There was no thrill, no rush, just an immense, quiet satisfaction. The kind you get from finally closing a wound that's been open too long. That night, as I folded laundry, I found one of his shirts, expensive, pressed, smelling faintly of perfume I didn't own. I held it for a second, then dropped it in the trash. No ceremony, just closure. From then on, I moved differently, my steps lighter, my mind sharper. The fear was gone. He could mock, dismiss, or underestimate me. But he was already standing on a trap built from his own arrogance. One evening, he came home humming, poured himself a drink, and told me he was thinking of taking a little trip soon. I smiled and said, "You should." He didn't notice the small box by the door, the one with my documents, the last thing I needed to disappear completely. As he sipped his whiskey, I studied him. This man I'd spent 4 decades beside. I searched for the love I once had, but there was nothing left. Just the shell of someone who'd long mistaken my endurance for emptiness. When he turned in for the night, I stayed up, writing a short note and placing it inside my jewelry box. Not a confession, just a reminder to myself. You are not leaving him. You are returning to yourself. I folded it, sealed it, and packed the last of my things. By then, the plan wasn't vengeance anymore. It was reclamation. And the best part? He'd never see it coming. Not from the woman who'd spent her whole life making sure everything ran smoothly. I'd spent decades keeping his world in order. Now, I was learning how to quietly erase myself from it. The morning I left him, the sky was the same dull grey it had been for weeks. Soft light pressing through the curtains. Quiet. Unremarkable. I made coffee like always. The routine steadied me. The smell of it. The slow drip. The sound of the spoon against the mug. Small things that felt like control. He shuffled into the kitchen wearing his robe, kissed my cheek, and asked if I'd paid the electricity bill. The casualness of it almost made me laugh. "Yes," I wanted to say. "I've paid every bill. I've built every wall. I've funded every lie." But all I said was, "It's handled." He left early for a meeting, watched from the window as he backed out of the driveway, still humming. When the car disappeared around the corner, I felt the stillness settle. Not peace, exactly, but clarity. I moved quickly. Years of nursing had taught me efficiency under pressure. I packed the last of my clothes, my mother's wedding ring, a stack of important papers, and the note I'd written to myself the night before. The rest stayed. The house, the furniture, the life. Let him keep the stage props. At the bank, I withdrew everything that was rightfully mine. The inheritance funds I'd traced through the accounts, the savings he thought were gone. I closed the joint accounts, one by one. The manager asked if I wanted to leave any forwarding information. No, I said. There's no one left who needs it. Then I went to the lawyer's office. The sale for his business property was scheduled for that afternoon. He'd be there, all smug and sure. Only the property no longer belonged to him. I'd already signed the documents transferring full ownership to my name. I handed my lawyer the final authorization to sell it myself. Same buyer, same deal, but with a small amendment. The proceeds were to be wired directly to my personal account, the one under my maiden name. When he realized what had happened, it would already be done. The drive out of town was slow, almost meditative. The fields rolled by, golden and flat, and I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to keep everything together, all the nights I'd worked while he built something for us. Funny how it turned out I was the one doing the building all along. I stopped at a rest area 2 hours away and called the lawyer again. Did he sign? I asked. A pause, then a small chuckle. He did, the lawyer said, and then he saw the new paperwork. You should have seen his face. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. Just hearing those words was enough. The world finally tilted back into balance, quiet and clean. Before I hung up, the lawyer said softly, "You did the right thing, you know." I didn't answer. Justice doesn't always feel righteous. Sometimes it just feels quiet. By the time he called, I was already crossing the state line. His voice on the voicemail was half confusion, half fury. "Mary, what the hell is this? You can't just take everything. Call me back. We can fix this." I deleted it. There's no fixing a house built on theft. I checked into a small roadside inn that night under a different name. The woman at the front desk gave me a key and a kind smile, the sort you give someone who looks like they've finally decided to rest. In the room, I sat by the window and watched the headlights drift past on the highway. The silence felt strange at first, almost too big, but under it, there was something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. No more second phone glowing in the dark. No more pretending. No more being the steady backdrop to someone else's chaos. When I finally lay down, I expected to cry. I didn't. I just slept. Deep, dreamless, solid sleep. The next morning, I transferred the business sale funds to a new account in a coastal town where I'd already arranged to rent a small cottage. It wasn't much. 1 bedroom, white walls, a garden overrun with lavender, but it was mine. Every part of it. Before I left the inn, I sent one last envelope to the house. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the note I'd left myself weeks before. "You are not leaving him. You are returning to yourself. Nothing else." No explanations. No forwarding address. When he found it, he'd probably rage, maybe call the police, maybe tell people I'd gone crazy. That was fine. Let him craft his stories. That was his only true skill. I drove the last stretch without music, the wind through the open window carrying the smell of rain and salt. Somewhere along that road, the weight began to lift. It wasn't joy. It was lighter than that. Simpler. Just air, finally moving through me again. By the time I reached the coast, the sun was breaking through the clouds. I parked the car, stepped out, and stood for a long time just listening. Gulls, waves, the hush of something vast and indifferent. I'd spent 40 years waiting for permission to breathe. That morning, I didn't ask anyone for it. It took months before I heard about him again. Word drifted in through an old neighbor, the kind who still started calls with gossip before condolences. She said Richard had fallen on hard times. The business had crumbled after the sale. The mistress had left, and the money, what little he'd scraped together, had vanished in legal fees. "He looks smaller," she said softly, almost as if pitying him. I didn't answer. Men like Richard didn't shrink overnight. They simply lost the stage they'd built to appear taller. By then, I was living on the coast, in a small white cottage with chipped paint and a porch that overlooked the sea. The place smelled like salt and freedom, and for the first time in years, I could breathe without calculating who I had to be next. I started volunteering at a local clinic a few mornings a week. Old habits die slow. The patients were kind, the younger nurses deferential. When they called me Mrs. Thompson, I corrected them gently. "Just Mary, please." I'd stopped belonging to anyone but myself. The quiet here wasn't empty. It had texture. Waves against rocks, wind humming through the window frames, the sound of my own thoughts learning to trust silence again. I began to notice small things. The weight of my mug in the morning, the smell of coffee mixing with sea air, the ache in my hands that came from use, not despair. There was life in the ordinary again. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. His, still careful, still confident, as if control could be summoned through penmanship. I considered throwing it out, but curiosity is a stubborn thing. Inside, just a few lines. "I don't understand how you could do this to me. I loved you in my own way. I hope you're happy now." No apology, no ownership, just bewilderment that his world no longer bent to his will. I read it once, then fed it to the fire. The paper curled and blackened, the ink dissolving into smoke. Watching it disappear, I realized how strange it was that even his regret managed to center him. That was the last time I let him take space in my mind. After that, peace began to feel like something tangible. I planted herbs in the garden, painted the kitchen pale blue, and hung my mother's teacups on a small wooden rack. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the window. Silver hair, calm blue eyes, lines carved deep by time and truth, and barely recognized the woman staring back. She wasn't bitter. She was simply done. People think justice is loud, that it roars or burns. But mine came quietly. It came in the form of an open horizon, a single key to a home that was mine alone, and mornings where no one's voice dictated the air I breathed. I don't hate him anymore. Hate would mean carrying him with me, and I've carried enough. He lost everything that defined him: money, reputation, control. And I lost only the illusion that he'd ever been worthy of my faith. Sometimes, on the porch, I touch the ring that now hangs from a chain around my neck, not as a symbol of grief, but as a relic, proof that I survived what was meant to erase me. I think about all the women I've known who stayed quiet, who mistook endurance for loyalty. I hope they find what I found, that silence can be both cage and weapon, depending on when you break it. The sea keeps moving, tide after tide, never asking permission. I've learned to live like that, unapologetic, constant, whole, because I didn't disappear. I simply stopped existing for those who mistook my kindness for weakness.